You erased me from your life. I'll erase you from yours.
The garage smelled like motor oil and broken dreams, just like everything else in my life these days. I was under the hood of my beat-up Corolla, trying to coax another few months out of an engine that had given up hope around the same time I lost my job at Peterson Manufacturing. That's when I heard Monica's voice drifting through the thin walls of our suburban prison. "I wish I never had to touch him again," she said into her phone, voice dripping with the kind of disgust usually reserved for roadkill. "If I could start over, I'd make sure Jack never set foot in this house." I froze, wrench in hand, like some twisted game of statue. She always did say honesty was the best policy. Guess I should have read the fine print. 23 years of marriage, and this is what it comes down to? Me hiding in my own garage, eavesdropping on my wife's telephone confessions like some pathetic private investigator in a discount noir novel? The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been downsized from my supervisor position 6 months ago, but apparently I was still getting supervised, just not in the way I'd expected. "No, Evan, he doesn't suspect anything," Monica continued, her voice taking on that breathy quality I hadn't heard directed at me in years. "He's too busy feeling sorry for himself to notice what's right in front of him." Evan. The name hit me like a sucker punch to the solar plexus. I knew that name, Monica's business consultant from her HR firm. The guy with the leased BMW who'd been showing up in our cul-de-sac with increasing frequency, always with some excuse about strategy meetings and quarterly projections. Apparently, the only thing getting projected was my wife's affections onto someone else's balance sheet. I set down the wrench with the careful precision of a man defusing a bomb. Every movement felt deliberate, like I was afraid sudden motion might shatter whatever was left of my world. Through the grimy garage window, I could see Monica pacing in the kitchen, her silhouette animated with an energy I hadn't seen her direct toward our home in months. "Next weekend should work perfectly," she was saying. "Jack mentioned something about visiting Ray at that disgusting gym of his. We'll have the whole afternoon." Ray's boxing gym wasn't disgusting. It was authentic. But Monica had always preferred her environment sanitized, and her relationships complicated. Ray Martinez had been my best friend since high school, back when we both thought we'd conquer the world instead of getting conquered by it. His gym was a temple to honest sweat and straightforward violence, two things that were looking pretty appealing right about now. I crept closer to the door, connecting the garage to the kitchen, feeling like a burglar in my own home. The floorboards creaked under my feet, the same boards I'd been meaning to fix for 3 years, back when I thought we had a future worth renovating. "God, I can't wait to feel your hands on me again," Monica whispered into the phone, and I swear I could hear her smile through the wall. "Jack's gotten so soft. Pathetic, really. All he does is mope around looking for sympathy. Soft. Pathetic." The words carved themselves into my chest like initials on a tree, permanent and painful. I'd been out of work for 6 months, sure, but I'd been trying. Sending out resumes, going to interviews, swallowing my pride at career fairs where kids half my age looked at me like I was a relic from the industrial age. Meanwhile, Monica's career had been soaring. Promotions, raises, company cars, and apparently company men. "I know, baby," she continued, and the pet name she used to save for me now sounded foreign in her mouth. "Just a little longer, and then we can figure out our next steps. I'm thinking we need to be strategic about this. Jack's going to be a problem. A problem. 23 years of marriage, a daughter in college, a mortgage, shared dreams that had curdled into shared resentments, and I was a problem to be solved, like a math equation or a budget shortfall. I heard her footsteps moving toward the living room, and I quickly retreated to the workbench, grabbing a random tool and pretending to be absorbed in mechanical meditation. The door opened, and Monica appeared in the doorway, phone pressed to her ear. She looked good, better than she had in years. Her hair was styled differently, more expensive. New clothes that showed off the figure she'd been sculpting at her fancy gym membership. Even her posture was different, more confident. Success looked good on her. Infidelity apparently came with its own glow. "I have to go," she said into the phone, but her eyes were on me. "He's right here." She hung up and smiled, the same smile she'd given me on our first date, back when I thought I was lucky to be chosen. Now I wondered if I'd ever really been chosen at all, or if I'd just been the most convenient option at the time. "How's the car coming along?" she asked, her voice switching to the tone she used for talking to children and service workers. "It'll run," I said, not looking up from the engine. "Might not be pretty, but it'll get me where I need to go." "That's good, honey. Ray called, by the way. Something about this weekend?" "Honey." The word sat between us like a lie with legs. I wondered if she called Evan Honey, too, or if she'd graduated to something more creative. Knowing Monica, she'd probably workshopped pet names the same way she approached quarterly reviews, with charts and metrics and strategic planning. "Yeah, I might head over Saturday afternoon," I said, finally meeting her eyes. "Give you some space to catch up on work." Something flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe, or just annoyance at having to maintain the charade. "That sounds perfect. I do have some projects I need to focus on." Projects. Right. I nodded and turned back to the engine, listening as her heels clicked across the concrete floor and back into the house. The door closed with a soft thud that sounded like a period at the end of a sentence I wasn't ready to finish. I stood there in the gathering dusk, surrounded by the tools and machinery that used to make me feel competent, and tried to process what I'd just heard. My wife was cheating on me with some corporate smooth talker, planning their future while discussing me like a pest control issue. Our daughter Lila was away at college, probably too busy with her own life to notice her parents' marriage was decomposing in real time. The rational part of my brain, the part that had gotten me through 20 years of factory management, started cataloging facts. Monica was having an affair. She wanted me gone. They were planning something for next weekend. I was, in her words, going to be a problem, but the other part of my brain, the part that had been growing stronger during 6 months of unemployment and increasing irrelevance, was thinking different thoughts, darker thoughts. If Monica wanted to treat our marriage like a business transaction, maybe it was time to show her what happened when you breached a contract. I walked back into the house where Monica was making dinner with the kind of domestic performance that would have fooled me 6 hours ago. She hummed while she chopped vegetables, occasionally glancing at her phone when it buzzed with what I now knew were probably messages from her strategic consultant. "Smells good," I said, settling into my usual chair at the kitchen table. "Just pasta," she replied without turning around. "Nothing fancy." Nothing fancy. That seemed to be the theme of our entire relationship lately. I was nothing fancy. Our house was nothing fancy. Our marriage was nothing fancy. But apparently Evan and his BMW were fancy enough to warrant afternoon strategy sessions and breathless phone calls. We ate dinner in the kind of silence that passes for peace when you don't know you're already at war. Monica checked her phone between bites, smiling at messages I wasn't supposed to see. I chewed my pasta and planned my next move with the methodical patience of a man who'd finally found a project worth his attention. After dinner, Monica announced she had some work to catch up on and disappeared into her home office, the converted bedroom where she'd been spending more and more of her evenings lately. I could hear her typing, occasionally laughing at something on her screen, probably more strategic consulting. I settled into my recliner with a beer and the remote, but I wasn't really watching television. I was thinking, planning. For the first time in months, I felt like I had a purpose beyond sending out resumes and pretending everything was fine. If Monica wanted to play games, I'd play games. But I'd been a supervisor for 20 years, and I'd learned a thing or two about managing problems. The key was information, knowing exactly what you were dealing with before you made your move. Time to do some research. The flour canister was an inspired hiding spot. I had to give Monica credit for that. Who would think to look for a burner phone behind the gold medal all-purpose? Certainly not her unemployed husband, who barely knew how to work his own smartphone, let alone suspect the existence of secondary devices dedicated to extracurricular communication. But desperation makes you thorough, and 6 months of feeling like a stranger in my own home had sharpened my observational skills. I'd noticed Monica's regular phone never seemed to contain the messages that made her smile. I'd seen her typing responses to texts that never appeared on the screen when she showed me funny memes from work. Either she was having conversations with ghosts, or there was another device in play. Finding it felt like winning a lottery I'd never wanted to enter. The phone was a cheap prepaid model, the kind you buy with cash at convenience stores when you don't want your activities tracked. Monica had always been good with details. It's what made her successful at work and, apparently, successful at deception. The phone was fully charged, organized, and password protected with our anniversary date. Even her betrayals were sentimental. I scrolled through months of messages, each one a small knife twist in my chest. The progression was laid out like a case study in marital dissolution, professional courtesy evolving into personal interest blooming into flirtation, flirtation exploding into graphic descriptions of what they wanted to do to each other in various hotel rooms around the city. They had pet names for each other. She was Firecracker, and he was Stallion. I threw up a little in my mouth. They had a code for their meeting spots. Quarterly review at the downtown location meant the Marriott, while budget meeting at the satellite office translated to some boutique place on the north side. They even had ratings for their encounters, like some twisted Yelp for adultery. But the worst part wasn't the love talk or the secret meetings. It was the way they discussed me. I wasn't Jack, husband of 23 years and father of their mutual acquaintance's child. I was the situation. I was dead weight. I was the problem we need to solve. In one particularly charming exchange, Evan had written, "Can't wait until you're free of that anchor. You deserve so much better than a washed-up factory worker." Monica's response, "Soon, baby. I'm working on an exit strategy. Just need to be smart about it." An exit strategy. My wife was planning to leave me with the same methodical approach she brought to corporate restructuring. I wondered if she had PowerPoint presentations and timeline charts. Knowing Monica, she probably did. I photographed every message, every photo, every piece of evidence that might be useful later. Then I carefully returned the phone to its flour-dusted hiding place and tried to pretend I hadn't just watched my marriage get dissected like a frog in biology class. The next few days were an exercise in advanced acting. I smiled when Monica asked about my job search. I nodded when she explained her late nights as crunch time for the Henderson account. I even managed to look sympathetic when she complained about how stressed she was at work, knowing full well that her stress relief came in the form of afternoon appointments with Stallion. But pretending was exhausting, and by Friday I was ready to do some field research. Monica had a client dinner that evening, code for hotel room gymnastics with the BMW guy. She dressed carefully, wearing the black dress I'd bought her for our anniversary last year, and the perfume she claimed was too expensive for everyday use. Apparently, adultery qualified as a special occasion. "Don't wait up," she said, kissing my cheek with lips that tasted like lies and Chanel. "This could run late." "No problem," I replied, settling into my recliner with a beer and the remote. "I'll probably turn in early anyway." I waited exactly 30 minutes after her car pulled out of the driveway, then grabbed my keys and followed her digital breadcrumbs to the Marriott downtown. My beat-up Corolla looked like a homeless person at a yacht club in the hotel's valet parking area, but it had the advantage of invisibility. Nobody pays attention to a car that looks like it should be in a junkyard. I found Monica's Honda Civic in the parking garage. She'd been driving more conservatively lately, saving the flashy company car for actual work events. Smart, but not smart enough to check for her unemployed husband's surveillance operation. Evan's BMW was parked 3 spaces away, because of course it was. The vanity plate read, "Closer One," presumably a reference to his sales prowess, though I had other interpretations in mind. The car was pristine, detailed to showroom perfection, the kind of vehicle that screamed, "I lease my identity along with my transportation." I sat in my car for 2 hours, feeling like the world's most pathetic private investigator, until they finally emerged from the hotel lobby. Monica looked flushed and satisfied, her carefully styled hair slightly mussed. Evan had his hand on the small of her back, guiding her toward the parking garage with the proprietary confidence of a man who thought he'd won something. They stopped next to the BMW, and I watched through my cracked windshield as they engaged in what could only be described as a goodbye makeout session. Monica, my wife, the mother of my child, the woman who'd promised to love me in sickness and health, was pressed against a luxury sedan, letting another man's hands roam over the body I'd once thought belonged to our marriage. Something cold and sharp crystallized in my chest. Not heartbreak. I'd moved past that somewhere around message number 50. This was something else. Something that felt like clarity. I waited until they'd driven away in their respective vehicles, then I got out of my car and walked over to where the BMW had been parked. In my pocket, I had a key, not to Evan's car, but to my own house. It worked just as well for scratching a message into pristine paint. "Karma's coming," I carved into the driver's side door. "Hope you're insured." It wasn't elegant, but it was honest. And honesty, as Monica always said, was the best policy. I was walking back to my car, feeling better than I had in months, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Jack? Jack Peterson? What are you doing here?" I turned around and found myself face to face with Mrs. Glick, our neighbor from 3 houses down. She was emerging from her own car, arms full of shopping bags, looking at me with a kind of curiosity that had made her the unofficial intelligence network of our entire subdivision. "Oh, hey, Mrs. Glick," I said. trying to look casual while standing next to a vandalized luxury vehicle. Just meeting a friend for drinks? She glanced around the parking garage, noting the absence of any bars or restaurants, then looked back at me with the expression of a woman who just stumbled onto the neighborhood's most interesting gossip in months. "How nice," she said, but her eyes were already cataloging details. "Monica's working late again tonight, isn't she? I saw her leave earlier. She looks so dressed up. Must be an important client." "Yeah," I said, backing toward my car. "Very important." Mrs. Glick nodded slowly, her gaze drifting to the scratched BMW, then back to me. I could practically see the gears turning in her head, connecting dots and filing information for future distribution. "Well," she said finally, "I should let you get to your friend. Drive safely, Jack." I drove home in a cold sweat, knowing that I'd just made my first tactical error. Mrs. Glick was a sweet old lady, but she had the discretion of a town crier and the memory of an elephant. By tomorrow morning, half the neighborhood would know that Jack Peterson had been skulking around downtown parking garages while his wife was supposedly at client dinners, but as I pulled into my driveway and saw Monica's car already in the garage, she'd beaten me home by 20 minutes, just enough time to shower away the evidence of her quarterly review. I realized I didn't care. Let Mrs. Glick talk. Let the neighbors gossip. At least someone would finally be telling the truth about what was happening in the Peterson household. Monica was in the kitchen when I walked in, wearing her robe and making tea like she'd been home all evening. "How was your evening?" she asked without looking up from her mug. "Quiet," I said. "How was the client dinner?" "Productive," she replied, and I had to admire her commitment to the performance. "We made some real progress on the Henderson account." "That's great, honey," I said, and the endearment felt like broken glass in my mouth. "I'm glad you're making progress." She smiled and kissed my cheek again, and I wondered if she could taste the lies on her own lips. Probably not. She'd been practicing too long. That night, I lay in bed next to my wife, listening to her breathe and planning my next move. She thought I was a problem to be solved, dead weight to be discarded, an anchor holding her back from her true potential. She was about to learn that some anchors don't just hold you back, they drag you down to the bottom. If Monica wanted an exit strategy, I'd give her one. But it wouldn't be the kind she was expecting. Ray's boxing gym occupied the ground floor of a converted warehouse on the wrong side of town, the kind of place that looked like it should be condemned but somehow kept producing fighters who could take punishment and dish it out in equal measure. The building had been a lot of things over the years. Textile factory, auto parts warehouse, briefly a nightclub that got shut down for reasons nobody discussed. But under Ray's management, it had found its true calling as a temple to honest violence. I needed some honest violence in my life. "You look like heck," Ray said when I walked through the door Saturday afternoon. He was wrapping the hands of some kid who couldn't have been more than 19, all elbows and attitude and dreams of prize-fighting glory. "When's the last time you slept?" "Sleep's overrated," I replied, heading for the heavy bags in the back corner. "Besides, I've got too much on my mind." Ray finished with the kid and sent him off to work the speed bag, then ambled over to where I was lacing up the gloves I kept in my gym bag. Ray Martinez had been a middleweight contender back in the day before a detached retina ended his professional dreams and redirected his passion into teaching other people how to hit things properly. He was shorter than me, but built like a fire hydrant with hands that looked like they'd been carved from oak and a face that told the story of every fight he'd ever been in. "Monica still giving you grief about the job situation?" he asked, holding the heavy bag steady while I threw tentative jabs. "Something like that," I said, putting more weight behind the next punch. The impact sent a satisfying shock up my arm and into my shoulder. "Want to talk about it?" "Not particularly." Ray nodded and adjusted his grip on the bag. He'd known me long enough to recognize when I needed to work things out with my fists instead of my mouth. We'd been friends since high school, back when we both thought we knew everything and the world was just waiting for us to show up and claim our prizes. Ray had learned the hard way that the world didn't owe you anything. I was apparently a slower study. I worked the bag for 20 minutes, letting the rhythm of punch and breathe wash away the image of Monica pressed against Evan's BMW, the memory of her voice discussing me like a budget line item to be eliminated. Sweat stung my eyes and my shoulders burned, but it felt good to hurt in a way that made sense, to engage in violence that had rules and purpose and clean endings. "Better?" Ray asked when I finally stepped back, gasping. "Getting there," I said, pulling off the gloves. "Ray, can I ask you something?" "Shoot." If you found out Carmen was cheating on you, what would you do? Ray's expression shifted, the easy camaraderie replaced by something sharper. Carmen was Ray's wife of 15 years, a nurse at the county hospital who worked night shifts and put up with Ray's gym obsession with the patience of a saint. They had the kind of marriage I'd thought Monica and I had. Solid, built on mutual respect and shared dreams. That's a heck of a hypothetical question, Jack. Humor me. Ray was quiet for a long moment, his eyes focused on something beyond the gym's grimy windows. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man who'd thought seriously about violence and its consequences. First, I'd make sure I knew what I was dealing with, he said finally. No assumptions, no jumping to conclusions. Get the facts, all of them, before making any moves. And then? Then I'd decide if the marriage was worth saving or if it was time to cut my losses. He looked at me directly. But either way, I wouldn't go down without making sure everyone involved understood the consequences of their choices. I nodded, appreciating the careful way he'd answered without asking the obvious follow-up questions. Ray had always been good at reading between the lines. Hypothetically speaking, I said, what if the person being cheated on had been made to feel like they were the problem? Like their unemployment and general uselessness had driven their spouse into someone else's arms? Ray's jaw tightened. Hypothetically speaking, that person would be getting fed a line of BS designed to make them blame themselves for someone else's moral failures. Cheating's a choice, Jack. It's not something that happens to you, it's something you do. Even if the marriage was already in trouble. Especially then. You want out of a marriage, you get out. You don't sneak around making your spouse feel crazy while you audition replacements. Ray picked up a towel and handed it to me. This hypothetical person you're asking about, they wouldn't be responsible for their spouse's infidelity, but they would be responsible for how they chose to respond to it. I wiped sweat from my face and considered his words. Ray was right, of course. Monica's affair wasn't my fault, regardless of my employment status or her dissatisfaction with our marriage. But my response? That was entirely on me. Thanks, I said. That helps clarify things. Jack, Ray said as I headed for the locker room, if this stops being hypothetical, you call me. Don't try to handle everything alone. I showered and changed clothes, feeling more centered than I had in weeks. The physical exertion had cleared my head, and Ray's advice had given me a framework for thinking about my situation. I had facts. Monica's burner phone, the hotel meetings, the exit strategy discussions. I had confirmation, seeing them together, watching her lie to my face afterward. Now I needed to decide what I wanted to accomplish with that information. Did I want to save my marriage? The honest answer was no. 23 years was a long time, but it was also a sunk cost. The woman I'd married wouldn't have conducted a months-long affair while discussing her husband like a pest control problem. The woman was gone, replaced by someone who'd learned to lie with professional efficiency. Did I want revenge? The honest answer was yes. Not just for the cheating, but for the gaslighting. The way she'd made me feel like my unemployment was a personal failing that justified her betrayal. For the months of fake sympathy and manufactured intimacy while she planned her escape with another man. But revenge was a tricky business. Done wrong, it could backfire spectacularly. Done right, it could be deeply satisfying and strategically effective. I was still mulling over possibilities when I got home and found Monica in the kitchen, preparing what looked like a romantic dinner for two. Candles, wine, the good china we usually saved for holidays. She changed into a dress I'd never seen before, something that showed off her figure and probably cost more than my monthly unemployment check. "You're home early," she said, not quite managing to hide her disappointment. "I thought you'd be at Ray's longer." "Finished up sooner than expected," I replied, noting the way she'd positioned herself between me and the dining room. "What's the occasion? Can a wife make a nice dinner for her husband without a special occasion?" It was a reasonable question. And except for the fact that Monica hadn't made a nice dinner for me in approximately 6 months. Also, the table was set for two, but there were 3 wine glasses, one at each place setting and one on the kitchen counter, half empty and bearing traces of lipstick that didn't match what Monica was wearing. "Of course," I said, playing along. "Should I change clothes?" "That would be nice," she said, her smile tightening around the edges. "Take your time." I headed upstairs, but instead of going to our bedroom, I slipped into Lila's old room, which had a window that overlooked the driveway. Sure enough, a familiar BMW was parked on the street, just out of sight from the kitchen window. Evan was sitting behind the wheel, checking his phone with the impatience of a man whose romantic evening had been interrupted by an inconvenient husband. So this was how it was going to be. Monica had planned a cozy dinner with her lover, expecting me to be gone for hours. When I'd shown up early, she'd had to improvise, send Evan to wait in the car while she played the devoted wife, hoping to get rid of me quickly so they could resume their evening. The audacity was almost impressive. Almost. I changed into clean clothes and took my time doing it, letting Monica stew downstairs while Evan waited in his car. When I finally returned to the kitchen, she was checking her phone with barely concealed anxiety. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine," she said quickly, shoving the phone into her pocket. "Just work stuff. You know how it is." "I do indeed," I said, settling into my chair at the dining table. "This looks amazing, honey. What's the occasion again?" Monica served dinner with the mechanical efficiency of someone going through the motions, making conversation about my day at the gym and her plans for the upcoming week. But her heart wasn't in it, and she kept glancing at her phone, probably fielding increasingly impatient messages from her boyfriend cooling his heels in the BMW. I ate slowly, savoring both the food and the situation. Every minute I stretched out this domestic performance was another minute Evan spent wondering if his cover was blown. Another minute Monica had to maintain her charade, while her real evening plans disintegrated. "This wine is excellent," I said, raising my glass. "Very smooth, almost like it's been breathing for a while." Monica's hand tightened around her fork. "I opened it just before you got home." "Huh. Must be a really good vintage then." I took another sip, watching her over the rim of my glass. "You seem distracted tonight. Everything okay at work?" "Just the usual stress," she said. "Nothing I can't handle." "I'm sure. You've always been good at handling multiple priorities simultaneously." We finished dinner in increasingly strained silence, Monica checking her phone every few minutes while I deliberately prolonged the meal with second helpings and detailed commentary on the food. By the time I finally pushed back from the table, claiming to be stuffed, Monica looked like she was ready to crawl out of her skin. "That was wonderful," I said, standing and stretching. "I think I'll take a walk, work off some of this food. Care to join me?" "Oh, no," Monica said quickly. "I'm pretty tired. Think I'll just clean up and turn in early." "Suit yourself. I'll probably walk down to the corner store, maybe stop by the Hendersons and see how they're doing. Haven't talked to them in a while." The Hendersons lived at the end of our street, which meant my walk would take me directly past wherever Evan had parked his BMW. Monica's face went pale. "Actually," she said, "maybe I will join you. Fresh air sounds nice." "Great," I said, grabbing my jacket. "We can make it a romantic evening stroll, just like old times." We walked out together, and I had the satisfaction of seeing Evan's BMW pull away from the curb just as we reached the sidewalk, taillights disappearing around the corner like a guilty conscience fleeing the scene. "Huh," I said, watching the car disappear. "Was that a BMW? Don't see many of those in our neighborhood." "I didn't notice," Monica said, but her voice was tight with frustration. We walked around the block in silence. Monica's romantic evening thoroughly ruined, my understanding of the situation completely clarified. She wasn't just cheating. She was bringing her affair into our home, planning intimate dinners with her lover in the house we'd bought together, using our marriage as cover for her new relationship. The disrespect was breathtaking, and it was going to cost her everything. The Riverside Community Center's annual charity auction was the kind of event that brought together all the local professionals, business owners, and social climbers for an evening of competitive philanthropy and networking. Monica had been looking forward to it for weeks, treating it as an opportunity to show off her success and make connections that might benefit her career. She'd bought a new dress, made appointments for hair and nails, and spent considerable time planning her outfit like she was attending the Met Gala instead of a suburban fundraiser. What she hadn't planned on was her unemployed husband deciding to attend as well. "You're coming?" she asked when I announced my intention over breakfast that morning. "I thought you said these events were boring." "They are," I replied, buttering my toast with deliberate care. "But I figure it's time I started getting out more, maybe do some networking of my own. You never know who might have job leads." Monica's smile faltered slightly. "Of course, that's great, very proactive." "I thought so. Plus, it'll be nice to spend an evening out together. We don't do that much anymore." "No," she said slowly. "We don't." I could practically see her mental calculations. How to manage her husband's presence while maintaining her carefully constructed professional image. how to explain my attendance to colleagues who probably assumed she'd left her blue-collar baggage at home. Monica had always been good at compartmentalizing her life, keeping her work world separate from her domestic obligations. Tonight, those worlds were going to collide. The community center was decorated with the kind of understated elegance that screamed tasteful charity event. White linens, modest floral arrangements, silent auction tables, displaying donated goods from local businesses. The crowd was exactly what I'd expected. Well-dressed professionals sipping wine and discussing property values, their conversations a careful balance of humility and subtle status signaling. Monica worked the room with practiced efficiency, introducing herself to potential contacts and renewing acquaintances with existing colleagues. She was good at this, charming without being pushy, professional without being cold. I followed a few steps behind, playing the supportive spouse while cataloging faces and names for future reference. That's when I spotted Evan near the bar, looking perfectly at home in his expensive suit and designer glasses. He was talking to a small group of people, gesturing with the kind of animated confidence that suggested he was either very drunk or telling a very good story. Probably both. "Jack," Monica said, appearing at my elbow with 2 glasses of wine, "I'd like you to meet some people from the office." She guided me toward a cluster of her coworkers, introducing me with the kind of bright enthusiasm that felt slightly manic. These were the people she spent her days with, the colleagues who'd heard about her unemployed husband but never met him in person. I could see them trying to reconcile their expectations with the reality of a reasonably well-dressed man who could hold a conversation about something other than factory work. "Jack's been exploring new career opportunities," Monica explained when someone asked about my background. "It's an exciting time for him." "That's wonderful," said a woman whose name tag identified her as Carmen Rodriguez from Human Resources. "What field are you looking into?" "I'm keeping my options open," I replied. 20 years in manufacturing gives you a pretty broad skill set. Problem solving, team management, process improvement. Those skills translate to a lot of different industries." Carmen nodded approvingly. "Absolutely. Sometimes a career transition can be the best thing that happens to you, forces you to think outside your comfort zone." "Exactly," I said, glancing at Monica. "Sometimes you don't realize how limited your perspective has become until circumstances force you to reevaluate everything." Monica's smile tightened slightly, but she maintained her composure as the conversation continued. I made small talk with her colleagues, asking about their work and sharing carefully edited stories from my factory management days. They seemed surprised by my ability to engage in professional conversation, as if they'd expected me to grunt and scratch myself like some unemployed caveman. "I'm going to refresh our drinks," Monica announced after about 20 minutes of this. "Jack, would you like to come with me?" "Sure," I said, following her toward the bar where Evan was still holding court with his audience. As we approached, Evan glanced in our direction and his expression shifted from confident storyteller to deer-in-headlights panic. He'd probably been enjoying the evening, secure in the knowledge that he was attending a professional event where his affair with Monica could hide behind the cover of business networking. The last thing he'd expected was to come face to face with the husband he'd been betraying. "Monica," he said as we reached the bar, his voice slightly strained. "Good to see you. And you must be Jack. I've heard so much about you." "All good, I hope," I replied, extending my hand for a shake that lasted just slightly too long. "And you're Evan, right? The business consultant Monica's been working with?" "That's right," Evan said, his palm slightly damp with nervous sweat. "We've been collaborating on some strategic initiatives." "Strategic initiatives," I repeated as if testing the phrase. "That sounds important. What kind of strategies are we talking about?" Evan's eyes flicked to Monica, who was studying the wine selection with intense concentration. "Oh, you know, organizational restructuring, efficiency improvements, that sort of thing." "Fascinating," I said. "I did some organizational restructuring myself back in my factory days. It's all about identifying redundancies and eliminating unnecessary positions, right? Streamlining operations to maximize productivity?" "Exactly," Evan said, relaxing slightly as the conversation moved to safer ground. "You have to be willing to make tough decisions about what's essential and what's just dead weight." Dead weight. The same phrase Monica had used in her text messages. I smiled and nodded as if he'd just shared profound wisdom instead of accidentally quoting his girlfriend's assessment of her husband. "That's a great way to put it," I said. "Dead weight. I'll have to remember that phrase. Very descriptive. Monica finally turned back to us, 2 glasses of wine in her hands and a forced smile on her face. "Here we go," she said, handing me a glass. "Evan, are you enjoying the auction?" "Very much," he replied, his confidence returning now that the conversation had moved away from strategic restructuring metaphors. "I actually bid on that golf package. Figured it would be good for client entertainment. Golf's a great networking tool," I agreed, though I've always preferred more direct forms of competition. Boxing, for instance. Very straightforward. You hit the other guy until one of you can't continue. Evan laughed uncomfortably. "I'm not much of a fighter myself." "No?" I said, taking a sip of wine. "That's interesting. I would have thought someone in your line of work would need to be comfortable with confrontation. All that organizational restructuring and deadweight elimination must involve some difficult conversations." "Well, yes, but that's more about strategic communication than physical confrontation." "Strategic communication," I repeated. "Another great phrase. You really have a gift for this consulting language, Evan. Very diplomatic." The conversation continued for another few minutes, with Evan growing increasingly uncomfortable under my friendly interrogation, and Monica looking like she wanted to disappear into the floor. I kept my tone light and conversational, but every comment carried just enough edge to let Evan know that I wasn't the oblivious husband he'd assumed me to be. Finally, Monica announced that she wanted to check out the silent auction items, effectively ending the conversation and pulling me away from Evan before I could inflict any more psychological damage. We walked among the auction tables, Monica pretending to study donated artwork and restaurant gift certificates, while I continued my performance as the supportive spouse. "You seem to hit it off with Evan," she said casually as we examined a spa weekend package. "Nice guy," I replied. "Very articulate. I can see why you enjoy working with him. He's very professional." "I'm sure he is, though I have to say some of his terminology was interesting. All that talk about dead weight and organizational restructuring makes me wonder what kind of changes your company is planning." Monica's hand froze over the bid sheet she'd been pretending to read. "What do you mean?" "Oh, nothing specific. Just wondering if your job is as secure as we've been assuming. Companies don't usually bring in outside consultants unless they're planning major changes. Layoffs, department consolidations, that sort of thing." "My job is fine, Jack. Of course it is. You're far too valuable to be considered dead weight." I smiled at her, enjoying the way she flinched at the phrase. "I'm just saying, it never hurts to be prepared for unexpected changes. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones planning the biggest surprises." We finished our circuit of the auction tables in increasingly tense silence, Monica's professional networking mood thoroughly destroyed by my presence and pointed comments. As we prepared to leave, I made sure to stop by Evan's group one more time. "Great meeting you tonight, Evan," I said, shaking his hand again. "I hope we'll have more opportunities to chat in the future. Maybe you could come by the house sometime. Monica's always talking about her work projects. I'd love to hear more about these strategic initiatives you're developing together." Evan's face went pale. That's very generous, but I'm pretty busy with client commitments." "Of course you are. Well, the invitation stands. Our door is always open for Monica's colleagues." I paused, as if a thought had just occurred to me. "By the way, nice car. I saw you getting out of that BMW in the parking lot. Beautiful vehicle. I hope you have good insurance. You never know when someone might key a car like that out of pure jealousy." Evan's eyes widened slightly, and I knew he'd made the connection. He'd probably found the scratches on his car door and wondered who might have been responsible. Now he knew. Monica and I drove home in complete silence, the evening's events hanging between us like a loaded tool. She stared out the passenger window while I hummed along to the radio, feeling better than I had in months. For the first time since discovering her affair, I'd been the one controlling the conversation, setting the agenda, making other people uncomfortable with their choices. It was a good feeling. I was looking forward to exploring it further. The beauty of having a wife who worked in human resources was that she understood the importance of documentation. Monica kept meticulous records of everything: household expenses, tax documents, insurance policies, bank statements. She filed everything in clearly labeled folders, organized by date and category, stored in the home office that had become her sanctuary from our deteriorating marriage. What she hadn't counted on was her unemployed husband developing his own appreciation for thorough documentation. While Monica was at work Tuesday morning, I conducted a comprehensive audit of our financial situation. 23 years of marriage had resulted in a complex web of shared assets and joint responsibilities. But the more I studied our records, the more I realized that Monica had been quietly reorganizing our finances in preparation for her exit strategy. She'd opened new accounts at different banks, slowly redirecting her paychecks and bonuses into funds I didn't have access to. She changed the beneficiaries on her life insurance and retirement accounts. She'd even been making extra payments on her car loan, the one that was solely in her name, while letting our joint obligations slide. Monica was preparing for a divorce, systematically protecting her assets while leaving me exposed to our shared debts. It was methodical, strategic, and completely in character for someone who approached everything like a business transaction. Two could play that game. I spent the morning making phone calls and gathering information. Our mortgage was in both names, but I'd been the primary income earner for most of our marriage, making me equally responsible for the debt, but equally entitled to the asset. Our joint checking and savings accounts could be accessed by either party, which meant I had the same withdrawal rights Monica did. The car I drove was old and worthless, but it was titled in my name only. Most importantly, I'd been documenting Monica's affair for weeks now, photographing her burner phone messages and tracking her movements. In a no-fault divorce state, adultery might not affect property division, but it could certainly influence public opinion and social consequences. By the time Monica came home from work, I'd restructured our entire financial relationship. "What do you mean the account's been closed?" she said, staring at her phone after trying to use our joint debit card for gas. "I transferred the funds to a new account," I explained calmly, not looking up from the newspaper I was pretending to read. Seemed like the prudent thing to do, given all the identity theft you hear about these days. "Jack, you can't just close our joint accounts without discussing it with me." "Actually, I can. Both our names were on the account, which means either party could make changes. I checked with the bank this morning. Completely legal." Monica's face was cycling through expressions like a slot machine. Confusion, anger, disbelief, calculation. She was trying to figure out how I'd discovered her financial maneuvering and what it meant for her carefully laid plans. "This is ridiculous," she said finally. "We need to be able to access our money." "We do," I agreed. "I opened a new account at First National. Here's your debit card and checkbook." I handed her an envelope containing her new banking materials. What I didn't mention was that the new account required both signatures for withdrawals over $500, effectively giving me veto power over major expenditures. "You can't do this," Monica said, her professional composure finally cracking. "I need access to our funds for household expenses, for my work, for strategic initiatives," I interrupted. "Don't worry, honey. I've made sure you have everything you need for legitimate expenses. We just need to be more collaborative about major financial decisions going forward." Monica stared at me like she was seeing a stranger, which was fair because I was certainly feeling like a different person than the man she'd been systematically betraying for months. The unemployed husband who'd absorbed her criticism and accepted her emotional distance was gone, replaced by someone who understood that marriage was indeed a business transaction, and business required protecting your interests. "We need to talk," she said. "I agree, but first I think we should invite Evan to join the conversation. After all, he's been so helpful with organizational restructuring advice. I'd hate to leave him out of important strategic planning sessions." Monica went very still. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that I know Monica. I know about the affair, the burner phone, the hotel meetings, the exit strategy discussions. I know about quarterly reviews at the downtown location and budget meetings at the satellite office. I know he calls you firecracker and you call him stallion, which is frankly embarrassing for everyone involved." She opened her mouth to deny it, then closed it again as the futility of lying became apparent. I could see her switching gears, moving from deception to damage control. "Jack, I can explain." "I'm sure you can. You're very good at strategic communication. But before you start explaining, you should know that I've documented everything. Every text message, every photo, every conversation about what a pathetic anchor I've become, and how you can't wait to be free of me." Monica sank into the kitchen chair across from me, her face pale. "How long have you known?" "Long enough to make some strategic plans of my own." "What do you want?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications and possibilities. What did I want? 6 months ago, I would have wanted to save our marriage, to find some way to rebuild what we'd lost. But that man had been operating under the assumption that our marriage was worth saving, that Monica's coldness was temporary, that we were partners working through a difficult period together. Now I knew better. I want you to understand that actions have consequences, I said finally. You've spent months treating me like a problem to be solved, dead weight to be eliminated, an obstacle to your happiness. You've lied to my face, brought your lover into our home, and planned your exit strategy while pretending to be a devoted wife. You've made me feel crazy, worthless, and responsible for your unhappiness. Jack! I'm not finished. You want to leave? Fine. You want to be with Evan? Congratulations. But you don't get to destroy our marriage and walk away with everything while leaving me with nothing. You don't get to rewrite history to make yourself the victim and me the villain, and you sure as heck don't get to do it quietly. Monica's eyes widened as the implications of my words sank in. What are you going to do? I'm going to give you the same consideration you've given me, which is to say, none at all. I stood up and walked toward the door, leaving Monica sitting alone in the kitchen with her closed bank accounts and her exposed secrets. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of my own life. It was time to show everyone else what strategic restructuring really looked like. The next morning, I started making calls. First, I contacted Monica's boss at the HR firm where she worked, a woman named Patricia Chen, who'd always been cordial during company social events. I explained that I was concerned about some unusual behavior from Monica and wondered if she'd been under extra stress at work lately. She's been working a lot of late nights, I said, injecting just the right amount of worried husband concern into my voice. Coming home at all hours, very secretive about her projects. I'm worried she might be taking on too much responsibility. Patricia assured me that Monica was handling her workload fine, but I could hear the curiosity in her voice. Planting seeds of doubt about an employee's stability and judgment was a delicate art, but I'd learned a few things about office politics during my 20 years in management. Next, I called our daughter Lila at college. Dad? She said, sounding surprised to hear from me during the week. Is everything okay? I need to talk to you about something important, I said. It's about your mother and me. I explained the situation carefully, focusing on the facts rather than my emotions. Lila had always been closer to Monica, but she was also old enough to understand that marriage was complicated and people weren't always who they seemed to be. Mom's having an affair? She said when I finished. Are you sure? I'm sure. There was a long pause. What are you going to do? I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth about what's been happening in this family. Your mother has been very concerned about her professional reputation and social standing. I think it's time she learned what it feels like to have those things threatened. Dad, maybe you should think about this. I've been thinking about it for weeks, Lila. Your mother made her choices. Now she gets to live with the consequences. After I hung up, I spent the rest of the morning crafting a detailed email that laid out the entire story of Monica's affair, complete with screenshots of her text messages and a timeline of her deceptions. I included photos of Evan's keyed BMW, documentation of Monica's financial manipulations, and a comprehensive analysis of how she'd systematically planned to abandon our marriage while maintaining her image as a devoted wife and professional success story. Then I sent it to everyone in Monica's contact list. Her coworkers, her boss, her professional network, her college friends, her family members, our neighbors, our daughter's friends' parents, the members of her book club, her yoga instructor, and the organizers of every charity event and social function she'd ever attended. I sent it to Evan's professional contacts too, after a little online research revealed his business network and client list. The subject line read, "The Truth About Monica Peterson and Evan Williams, a Case Study in Strategic Deception." By the time Monica came home from work that evening, her carefully constructed world had completely imploded. Her phone had been ringing nonstop with calls from friends, family, and colleagues who'd received my email. Her boss had called her into a meeting about personal matters affecting her professional judgment. 3 of her biggest clients had requested different account representatives. Her mother had called crying, her sister had called screaming, and her book club had sent a group text asking her not to attend their next meeting. Evan hadn't fared much better. His consulting business depended on his reputation for discretion and professionalism, both of which had been severely compromised by the detailed documentation of his affair with a married client. His wife had apparently received several forwarded copies of my email from helpful friends and neighbors. You destroyed everything, Monica said when she walked into the kitchen where I was calmly eating dinner. Her face was streaked with tears, and her professional composure had completely shattered. No, I replied, not looking up from my plate. You destroyed everything. I just made sure everyone knew about it. How could you do this to me? The same way you could lie to me for months while planning to leave me for another man. The same way you could discuss me like a problem to be eliminated while pretending to be a loving wife. The same way you could bring your affair into our home and make me feel crazy for suspecting something was wrong. Monica collapsed into the chair across from me, sobbing with the kind of raw desperation I'd never seen from her before. Jack, please, we can work this out. We can go to counseling. We can fix this. There's nothing to fix, Monica. You made your choice when you decided Evan was a better option than your husband. You made your choice when you started planning your exit strategy instead of working on our marriage. You made your choice when you decided I was dead weight holding you back from your true potential. I never meant for it to go this far. Yes, you did. You meant for it to go exactly this far, except you wanted to control the narrative. You wanted to be the successful professional woman who'd outgrown her blue-collar husband, not the cheating wife who destroyed her family for a midlife crisis with a man who drives a leased BMW. Monica looked at me through her tears, and I could see her finally understanding that the man she'd been manipulating and dismissing for months was gone. In his place was someone who'd learned to play the game by her rules, strategically, ruthlessly, and without regard for collateral damage. What happens now? She whispered. Now you get to experience what it feels like to have your life turned upside down by someone else's choices. Now you get to explain to everyone why you threw away a 23-year marriage for a consulting contract with benefits. Now you get to figure out how to rebuild your reputation and your relationships from scratch. I finished my dinner and put my plate in the dishwasher, then turned back to face my wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, one last time. Congratulations, Monica. You're finally free of all that dead weight. I hope it was worth it. As I walked out of the kitchen, leaving her alone with the wreckage of her strategic planning, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: complete satisfaction. Monica had wanted to treat our marriage like a business transaction, with winners and losers, assets and liabilities, strategic advantages and acceptable losses. She'd just learned that I was a much better businessman than she'd given me credit for,